So I was just answering a question about fertilizers. So what I was going to say is you can kind of categorize them in two different categories. At least I do in my mind. Those that you go out and buy and those that you can make or find in your homestead or farm or garden. And there's other categories too. So there's fertilizers that are solid fertilizers and then there's liquid fertilizers. I'm not sure if it just started again with the live. There's been some funny technical difficulties. So I'm just going to talk about fertilizers and I'm going to start again for the third time and I'm going to just do it. So yeah, there are fertilizers that you can buy in the store and then there are fertilizers that you can make or find on your own, not in a commercial setting. And then there are solid and liquid fertilizers also. So I'll start with those that you can buy at the store. There's a lot of different kinds of fertilizers and typically either both synthetic and organic fertilizers will have a rating on the front of them that's 3 numbers separated by dashes. And those numbers stand for NPK, so nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the 3 elements. Those are macronutrients that all plants need. And so with commercial fertilizers, that's kind of all that's in most of them. Sometimes there's some trace minerals, sometimes there's some other things, but those are the standard measurements for the contents and the sort of strength of fertilizers. So they're all different kinds of things that you can get in an organic setting that have different variations in terms of levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So there's also this difference between fertilizers and amendments. So amendments tend to be something that you add into the soil and build up over time versus a fertilizer, which is like, and I think this was your question, the person who asked the question, I think your name was Christina. Sorry, all the comments have been erased. So something to like increase plant growth now this season. So you're pretty much talking about nitrogen, although phosphorus and potassium have an impact on that too, especially if it's a root crop or a fruiting crop. So particularly phosphorus has an impact on root growth and fruit set. So one really common fertilizer that you can buy is basically dried, sterilized chicken manure. And some brands that are out there are Harmony and Symphony. Harmony is they're both sourced from chickens in basically factory farm situations. Symphony is sourced from cage-free, but large-scale, I believe. Neither of them are sourced from chickens that are fed entirely organic feed. I don't buy a lot of fertilizers, so some of that specific information may be incorrect. Just look on the package and ask at whatever store you're buying from, whether it's an online ordering kind of situation or a feed store that you can go into. So that's a high nitrogen, kind of just sprinkle some around the base of the plant and scratch it in, especially before rain. As I said before, I was talking about how water soluble nitrogen is. So nitrogen, if you just sprinkle, you don't have to work it into the soil, because if you just sprinkle it around, as soon as it rains or you irrigate, the water will carry it down to where the plant roots are. You can easily overdo it with nitrogen, even with dehydrated chicken manure. Definitely with fresh chicken manure, you don't want to ever put that on your plants. So look on the package, consult the package. It depends on what stage of life your plants are in. So plants, because nitrogen is water soluble, it's going to go down into the ground and then they're going to take up as much as they can at the moment. And if they're tiny little baby plants, they're not going to be able to use that much of it, and then it's going to wash away, or they might even get burned. Whereas if it's a big, robust plant with a big above ground part, but lots of leaves and lots of growth, then they'll be able to use that. But still, you don't want to overdo it. So definitely consult the package, consult if you have somebody knowledgeable at the store that you're buying it from. Go into that. Some other organic fertilizers are cottonseed meal, soybean meal, blood meal, and bone meal. Bone meal has less nitrogen, it has a lot of phosphorus. So bone meal is like a really readily available source of phosphorus. We use that when I worked on a flower farm because phosphorus, like I said, helps for flowering and fruiting and also root development. So if you're growing something like beets, then bone meal would probably be really helpful. I think onions too, bone meal is helpful. I know Natalie's used blood meal on onions and had really good success. So there's all these different alfalfa meal also. Kelp is less rich in nitrogen, but has a lot of trace minerals. So, yeah, nobody else is commenting. I hope it's working. So yeah, those are some options in terms of things you could buy that are dry in bags, and you just basically sprinkle them on the surface of the soil, scratch them in, you can mulch over them, and then water them in, and the water will carry that nutrition to the roots. There's lots of liquid fertilizers, like fish emulsion is a really great liquid fertilizer, and you basically just mix it with water and water your plants with that, whether it's in an irrigation system or in just a watering can or a bucket even. Obviously, if you're going to pour a bucket of liquid on a plant, you want to be careful not to crush the plant with the power of the water, but something like that. Hi, Meredith. Glad you're here. Nice to see you. So yeah, there's a bunch of different liquid, like pre-mixed liquids that have a lot of different things in them. Oh, I want to say bat guano is another thing that you can buy in bags. And the price range of all these things that I've mentioned varies widely. So bat guano is more expensive than chicken manure, and you can understand why. Like, nobody's commercially raising a bunch of bats, and so their manure is less easy to collect. Also, composted cow manure is something that you can buy. So make sure that it's composted, but that's an amendment that you can add to a fertilizer that you can add. So now I want to switch into the things that you don't buy. And cow manure is another one if you have a cow or if you know somebody with a cow. Excuse me. So getting your hands on some manure and then composting it. There's certain crops, and I'll go into that in a minute. You asked about that. Cool, it's working. Awesome. You asked about which crops really need fertilization, which don't so much, and I'll get into that in a minute. But for the crops that we call heavy feeders, so those that need a lot of fertilization, you don't want to put fresh cow manure, mix it in with the roots. But sometimes what I'll do, because I do have a cow, is I'll take some cow pies and kind of just sprinkle them on the surface of the soil around the base of a plant. Usually I do that with perennials more than annuals, but with certain things, it's okay with cow manure, definitely not with chicken manure. Horse manure is a little more problematic, and you can definitely use it if you have access to that too, but I would compost it. Horses are not ruminants, so they don't have the 4 chambers of their stomachs, so they don't break things down as much, and their fresh manure can definitely burn plants. Rabbit manure and goat manure are like little pellets. They're like little marbles, and you can put those right on your garden without composting. Also llama manure. So poop of lots of different kinds of animals can be a great fertilizer. Sometimes it needs to be composted in order to be safe. Sometimes you can put it on fresh. Obviously, you don't want to put manure-based fertilizer right on the surface of things like lettuce or spinach, or things that you're going to be harvesting the little tender leaves, because you don't want poop on your food. But if it's something like, a squash vine or broccoli, where the part of the of the plant that you're going to be eating is not going to be in contact with the manure, then that's no worries. Another very overlooked source of nutrition and fertilization for plants is pee, urine, even human urine. In India, they use cow urine too, and I'm sure in other places they use other kinds of animals' urine, but your own urine is really high in nitrogen and phosphorus. And it does have some salts, so you don't want to put fresh pee right on plants. But if you dilute it, people say about 8 to 1, so 8 parts water, 1 part urine. And depending on the crops, I've done as much as like 5 to 1, as high a concentration of urine. And then you can just pour it. Basically, it's like a liquid fertilizer. It's free, obviously. Everybody has access to it. And it can really make a difference. I've done that. I've done that urine water mixture with my garlic in particular, and just had really great results. And if anything's looking just a little peaked, looking like it needs a little bit of a boost, then try that. And, if you're comfortable with it. I should note that viruses can be transmitted in urine. So in this moment of a really scary virus going around, that's something to consider. But that the coronavirus in particular, and I think most viruses are killed by UV light. So if you do use your urine and there's like lots of different people eating in your garden, ideally you're not going to harvest anything that's touched the urine within a day or two, because it's kind of stinky. So you want to make sure to irrigate or watered off, or just, again, like with the example with the manure, like give it to the roots and not to the part of the plant that you're going to eat. So I want to talk a little bit about heavy feeders and lighter feeders. So certain kinds of crops really need more nitrogen in particular. And like I said, certain kinds of crops need more phosphorus. And getting more deeply into it, certain kinds of crops need more manganese or more boron or more. There's all kinds of macro and micronutrients that different kinds of crops need more of. But just talking about nitrogen, those are the ones that we call heavy feeders. So the crops that need more nitrogen are heavy feeders. And some examples of those are winter squash, corn, broccoli. Onions are kind of moderate. Garlic is kind of moderate. Let me think. Potatoes are kind of moderate. There's actually a list that we have. I will look it up. But yeah, all of the brassicas, so all of the cruciferous vegetables, tend to be in the realm of vegetables higher in protein. And so anything high in protein needs more nitrogen in order to make that protein, because protein, the difference between protein and fat and carbohydrates on a chemical level is nitrogen. So some crops that don't need fertilization are all the crops in the legume family. So beans, peas, alfalfa, if you're using that as a cover crop or as a forage crop for animals, any kinds of things like that, because they fix their own nitrogen. They have a relationship with beneficial bacteria in their roots, and they transform the nitrogen in the air into a form that the plants can take up. And so sometimes another way of fertilizing, you're not adding a fertilizer, is to interplant or succession plant legumes with other kinds of things. And so the legumes can actually add that nitrogen to the soil. And something that we do is we've sown all of our pathways in white clover. And clovers are all in the legume family. And so when we mow the pathways, the root die-off from that clover, ostensibly, and it seems to be working well, adds a little nitrogen boost to the soil. And because it's a pathway right in between the garden beds, then whatever's growing in the garden bed can get a little boost. So I'm just looking up, and you can look up to like heavy feeders. That's the terminology that is used to describe plants that need more nutrition. So here's the list that they're saying: asparagus, broccoli, celery, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, melons, okra. I haven't found that to be true with okra. Okra has been a pretty resilient, just like, yeah, I haven't found that to be true in my garden with okra. But again, we have fairly rich soil, but it sounds like you do too. Peppers, pumpkins, squash, and tomatoes. Yeah, tomatoes for sure. I can't believe I forgot those. So yeah, you can just look up each individual crop, but that's a good list of those that need a little extra boost. And like I said, with the liquid fertilizers, you can just add them as you notice a plant kind of looking a little peaked, especially yellowing is a sign of low nitrogen. So if you add nitrogen and your plants don't perk up, then it may be a disease issue or it may be a micronutrient issue. And a great book to reference about looking into the micronutrients and the mineral content in your soil is The Intelligent Gardener by Steve Solomon. And we have a blog post on the Wild Abundance blog about testing soil and how to work with that book, and a website that they've developed to interpret your soil test results and get a sense of whether or not you have a good balance of micronutrients in your soil. So that's my answer about fertilizers. Let me scroll down and see if there's some other questions. Thank you. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Squash. Yes, definitely squash is a heavy feeder. Awesome. So nobody has any more questions. I'll go to my list again and see what other questions. I'm going to do maybe one more if there's nobody else asking any. Let's see. How to grow and harvest mushrooms. Let's talk about mushrooms since those were brought up at the beginning. And if anybody has any other questions that pop up, please just write them in the comments. So we cultivate a lot of mushrooms on our farm, and the ones that we cultivate the most of are shiitakes. And shiitakes are decomposers. So they decompose wood that is no longer a part of a living tree. They don't parasitize living trees. They help to decompose the bodies of trees once they've fallen in a natural environment. And so how we do that is we harvest particularly oak trees. So shiitakes have an affinity for oak trees, although they will grow on some other kinds of trees. And we harvest them. We've harvested them in the early spring, so before the buds start to swell, but we're actually going to try in the fall this year. And so there's very particular windows, because you want the sugars in the wood to be within the wood and not out in the leaves. So it's either just arising out of the roots or coming back in for the winter. So at those early spring and fall, and there's charts of like the best time and how to figure that out. And we actually wrote a blog post on how to grow mushrooms on inoculated logs on the Wild Abundance blog, and it has a link to a good resource from Field and Forest Products. So they sell mushroom spawn, and they have a bunch of charts for different tree species that do well with different kinds of mushrooms and when to inoculate and all of this. So basically, when you harvest wood for inoculating with mushroom spawn and for growing mushrooms, you want to be really careful not to damage the bark. So you can totally, if you don't have access to forest or chainsaw, you can totally work with an arborist and ask them to harvest, if they have some wood that they can give you. But you definitely want them, like pay them some money or do whatever trade or support for them that you need to do, so that they're really careful with the logs and they don't damage the bark. Because when the bark's damaged, the logs dry out a lot quicker, and also other kinds of mushrooms will come in and inoculate those logs. So there's, especially here in the Southern Appalachian, there are fungal spores everywhere. And particularly turkey tail is considered kind of a weed mushroom on cultivated logs. And if you keep the bark intact, then that infestation of weed mushrooms or other kinds of adventitious mushrooms will be slower. So then you want to get your hands on mushroom spawn. You can either get in the spawn and a special tool to put the sawdust spawn in holes that you drill in the log, or you can get little plugs. The sawdust spawn is a lot cheaper, but you need special tools. So if you're just going to do a couple of logs just as an experiment for fun, then definitely go with the plugs, because you don't need to invest in all of this equipment. But if you're going to do a serious operation, then it's not that expensive to get the equipment, and the sawdust spawn is much, much more affordable, and you can get it in larger quantities. So then what you do is you drill holes into the logs at a particular width and depth, so that either the plug or the inoculating tool will push the spawn to fill that little hole that you've made exactly. And you fill the holes and then cover them over with wax. Cheese wax is the preferred kind of wax. A lot of us sort of more natural material oriented people would think to use something like beeswax, but it's too brittle, and also bugs like to eat it. So, excuse me, there's like things popping up. I don't use Facebook that often, so I'm like, what's happening? So yeah, and then you want to make sure to keep the logs in a in a damp place that's dark, to let the spawn run. So when the ends of the logs have that white spiderwebby looking mycelium, then the spawn has run and inoculated the whole log, and then you can stack them wherever you're going to stack them for fruiting. And it will take 6 months to a year for the fruits to appear, but then you'll get fruit with shiitake for several years, depending on the diameter of the mushroom. The diameter of the log. And you want to make sure, even when they're fruiting, to keep them in the shade and to keep them moist. And what we do is just let the rains stimulate fruiting, but some people will soak their logs to stimulate fruiting. So again, go check out the Wild Abundance website and a blog post that I wrote about how to grow mushrooms on inoculated logs, if that's something that you're interested in. And I encourage you to do it, because it's extremely rewarding. And especially if you have a shady spot to work with, that's a great crop that you can grow in the shade. It needs shade. So that's a wonderful thing to explore and experiment with. So what perennials are my favorite for food consumption? Fruit and nuts. We just put in, my partner Kaylin mostly just put in the first stage of a quite substantial orchard on our place. And so, yeah, I would say those are perennials I really love. Also, right about now, I've been eating a lot of stinging nettles. So stinging nettles, in terms of perennial greens in this area, are among my favorite, along with woods nettles. Let me think. All the perennial herbs, so a lot of the Mediterranean herbs like rosemary and sage. I haven't personally had a huge amount of success with the sort of esoteric permacultural perennial vegetables personally. Yeah, tree collards, when I was in coastal California, tree collards can be cool. They're basically just kale or collards that you don't have to replant, and they're kind of this climbing, vining, crazy thing. They don't do so well here because in the heat of the summer, the bugs just will decimate them. But yeah, what I found is, yeah, nettles, daylilies are also a yummy perennial vegetable. Ramps. Let me think. We have a whole article that I wrote on perennial vegetables. I'm thinking of others. Bamboo. Bamboo shoots are delicious. Bamboo has its own management issues, but I love bamboo in terms of just, we feed our goats and cow the tops, and you can build with it, and so much biomass, and make biochar, and eat the bamboo shoots. They're tasty. So yeah, that would be my answer. My favorite perennials for food consumption. So just to get into the fruits and nuts a little bit, apples and pears are just like the workhorses of orchards here, homesteading orchards, because there's so many things that you can make from them. So apples, of course, for fresh eating, for cider, for vinegar, dried apples, applesauce, they're so versatile. And then in terms of nuts, around here, hazelnuts, and Kalen just got all of these wonderful cultivars of black walnut that he's going to graft onto the wild black walnut rootstocks that have larger nuts and are easier to crack. So I'm excited to see how that pans out and if we can really do that. And there's another kind of nut called heart nut, which is also similar to black walnuts or Persian walnuts that we often call English walnuts. They're actually from Persia, the walnuts that you get in the grocery store, which don't do so well here. But the heart nuts supposedly do well here and are big and easy to crack, just like those. So I'm excited about nuts in terms of a perennial for eating. All right. Well, I think I'm going to go back to this birthday party if there's no other questions. And I want to give another shout out to our online gardening program, Online Gardening School. I'm going to put a link to it in the comments here in case you want some support and guidance as you garden this year. Natalie and I and our whole team have put this together with a lot of love, continue to put together with a lot of love. It's been really an amazing sort of focus and purpose to have in our lives right now, as so much is in upheaval and so many things can feel scary and feel out of our control. Just to put it out there, our love and experience of growing food so that other people can have support. And we are making it really accessible, doing a sliding scale, doing scholarships. We really just want people to participate. And, I have a friend who works for a large seed company, and she was saying how all of the seed, there's just like incredible record sales for vegetable seeds right now. And I'm seeing that when I look at the seed companies that I buy from. They're all not taking orders for periods of time, or they're backlogged. You won't get your seeds for 4 to 6 weeks. And she was saying, I just hope that people follow through. I hope that people, this moment of excitement and this moment of inspiration to grow food and to connect with the land and to sow seeds is not just coming from a place of panic or reactivity, but actually coming from a place of inspiration and excitement. And that with that is the diligence and the commitment to follow through, because, growing a garden, this is my 7th year at my home where I garden, and it's just now feeling like, oh yeah, this garden is established. Like there isn't that work every year of getting things set up, and, it takes time. And at